It's been a couple of years since release now, and I'm finally getting around to finishing Xenoblade Chronicles 3. I've owned it since launch. I've been talking about certain things in regards to the game. I do think it's the best Xenoblade game, but I just didn't get into it when it first came out. And there are a lot of reasons for that. I don't love these games. I prefer other RPGs, but I finally started getting around to playing it again. In part because X is coming out, but mostly because I genuinely wanted to, right? I genuinely think that this game is a massive improvement over previous entries in a lot of critical aspects, and it really needs to be acknowledged as such. But as it so happens, Xenoblade Chronicles 3 is absolutely one of those games that people are obsessively trying to come after and downplay. Right up there with No More Heroes 3, Bayonetta 3, Tears of the Kingdom, Super Mario Bros. Wonder, Fire Emblem Engage, right? All decade long, we've been dealing with this weird, like, anti Nintendo agenda from people like trying to tell us that these games are falling off, they're not selling well, that Nintendo is like going to go bankrupt. And it takes a lot of different forms and a lot of different ideologies, right? People attack from all sorts of different angles, from complaining about the frame rate or pretending that they could just pirate it on PC or doing anything they possibly can to try and relentlessly go after these titles. Metroid Dread infamously had like the David Jaff room, right? Like, situations like that. Completely goofy, off the wall things that no actual fan would ever believe, but casual players might buy into a little bit. And with Xenoblade Chronicles 3, there is one very critical aspect that I think needs to be talked about and needs to be discussed in regards to this situation, because I keep seeing this come up. This is not a single individual saying this. This is an actual conspiracy in the community that really, really needs to be addressed. Xenoblade Chronicles 3 is censored according to certain people online because the female characters aren't dressed the way they are in 2. Now, never mind that like all the characters that dress like sluts in 2 were blades, Never mind that characters like Mirag, who dress pretty conservatively, like do exist in 2. No, the conspiracy is that Nintendo forced Monolith Soft to censor Xenoblade Chronicles 3 because 2 was too sexy. This leans into the narrative that a lot of these anti-woke content creators have, that Nintendo is with the program, when that isn't actually true and has been observably not true for a long time, to the point where I would honestly say they feel like the only anti-woke community company in the entire industry. Like, this is something I've been talking about a lot in recent years, but the thing that gets me about Xenoblade Chronicles 3 is like when you look at this game and compare it to other titles, games like Elden Ring or Baldur's Gate 3, you see like this really deep, like severe gap in quality, right? Xenoblade Chronicles 3 is way better than all of that crap, right? It actually has red pill themes, it has great artwork, great female character design, good voice work, like, great combat gameplay, great scope. Xenoblade Chronicles 3 is a legitimately good RPG. And yet, for some reason, in the general gaming community, outside of the Xenoblade fan base, you're not really allowed to talk about that, right? Instead, you have to slant it in some weird way. It's like, oh, it's just an anime game. It's just a Xenoblade game. It's not as good as 2. And if you're being particularly conspiratorial, this baseless accusation that the game is censored, right? Without any real regard as to like the game's actual content. The people I see talking about this clearly haven't played the game at all and don't really know anything about it. So like when you actually look and see what is happening with these titles, you just see a lot of coping and seething from people who were never going to buy the game anyway. And this is a reoccurring thing when it comes to the Nintendo community, is that it feels like the most vocal critics, the people who are like shit posting on message boards, the people who are making things up, who are making like fan fiction about how Nintendo is going to fail, like they really don't know anything about the company at all. Like, it's very difficult for me to take people claiming that the game was censored seriously, considering like this is the same game that brought us like Giga Chad Corrales Rex. Okay, like how exactly are we supposed to believe people when they say that Nintendo is secretly controlled by feminists, like working at NOA, when they throw in a fucking harem ending of all things, which just has people seething to this day. But like you it's a cope is what I mean. Like whenever you see these people try and say that Xenoblade Chronicles 3 is censored, like it is just a cope. There's nothing to justify that. There's there's no evidence for it, right? There were no like significant changes in character models going from the Japanese to the English version, right? What exactly was censored? And this extends to a lot of other recent Nintendo games. I've seen people try and argue that Princess Peach Showtime and Echoes of Wisdom are supposed to be girl-powered Nintendo games, but that's not really the case at all. Like those games are very respectful of the game's overall tone and the setting, and really did a good job with those female leads. If anything, Nintendo's attempts at doing that are far superior to the competitions, right? This has been a reoccurring thing for a long time for Nintendo fans, like for Nintendo, and yet like we've gone through this entire period of like woke culture to the point where like it's starting to fall off entirely in the West, and it looks like Nintendo's never going woke. It looks as if woke culture is straight up going to die before Nintendo ever really does anything abrasive or ridiculous, or at least like overly so. And that is really, really interesting to see. That it's really exciting to see, and we are we're not seeing enough people acknowledge that. People genuinely believe that even Nintendo is doing it when you actually look at these games and what they're doing and what's actually in them, you see a wildly different picture, right? Like again, people have this line like, "Oh, they would never make Xenoblade Chronicles 2 today," when like they just put out Fire Emblem Engage, right? When they just put out something similar in a different franchise under a different team more recently, right? Like never mind the fact that Xenoblade Chronicles 2 like came out this console generation, right? Like what exactly are you trying to tell people here? They're like, "Oh, like 2017, that was forever ago. Nintendo has been completely co-opted and they're completely controlled." Like no, that's pretty observably not the case. And it keeps getting worse, right? Like the weird nonsense we've heard, like lobby at like Mario and Luigi Brothership, right? Like it's crazy. It really is absurd, and I'm really curious to see just how people like try and like rally against that game. Like all the copes I've seen have like just fallen flat, but much like they did with Echoes of Wisdom, but like they're trying for sure, and we can't let this happen. Okay, this kind of behavior needs to be called out more.